On today's episode of Locked On Mets, I was joined by Mets beat writer Justin Toscano to talk about all the latest news surrounding the Mets. We talk about the fact that Theo Epstein will no longer be considered to be the president of baseball operations, and we spent a lot of time talking about the Mets' decision not to bring Luis Rojas back as the manager next year. Justin got to see Rojas work from behind the scenes a little bit more than I did, being on the Mets beat, and he gives you his take on the Mets' decision to go in another direction.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So very happy to once again be joined by Mets beat writer Justin Toscano. We were just talking before we hit record here. It never stops in Mets land. Always something we were going to talk about 30 minutes ago. And then Theo Epstein now off the table. So I think we should just start with the most breaking news and work away from there. Theo Epstein will not be the president of the Mets.
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, even dating back to last year, right when he stepped down as president of baseball operations for the Cubs, I think a lot of people who knew that the Mets were searching for a president of baseball operations, obviously in baseball, when that occurs, your name or your mind goes to one name, and that's Theo Epstein, a guy who known for breaking curses, known for ending droughts. Did it twice in Boston, ended the drought, won another World Series, ended the Cubs drought. Then so the Mets, theoretically, baseball's biggest market, because of everything that surrounds the Mets in terms of how do I put this, public relations, things like that. I think this could have been Theo's toughest challenge. In many ways, it was certainly could have been his most daunting project, a chance to top off his legacy, but nothing doing there. I had heard that Steve Cohen and Theo talked, and it was cordial and whatnot, but they've got respect for each other, but just eventually agreed, that this wasn't the right fit for him. And I, as I report that, I mean, I'm not overly surprised because he's somebody who works for Major League Baseball as a consultant now. A lot of people have said in the past that his, and I'm just looking back at media reports from previous years, that his next venture, might be like even owning a team or something like that. And obviously that just wasn't going to happen here in terms of the stake. That just wasn't as logical. So yeah, that's off the table. Their search continues, but certainly a little bit of so it's a deflated balloon feeling, for Mets fans who certainly hope that they could get a proven, experienced leader in. And there's no more famous executive than Theo Epstein. I mean, I guess you could say Billy Beane because Moneyball, but Epstein is really, in the baseball world, the cream of the crop when it comes to baseball executives. And I think, it certainly would have been a pipe dream for a lot of fans, to get him, and kind of would have been a boon. But yeah, it didn't end up working out. But as I sit here, I'm not overly surprised at that.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, big names. I mean, Billy Beane and Theo Epstein are basically the biggest names there are when it comes to executives, maybe in professional sports, honestly, as far as American
Right.
sports goes. I mean, the name recognition they have is widespread. So when it came to this situation, as you mentioned, I mean, a lot had to fall into place for this to work out. An ownership stake, probably full autonomy over the team. I'm sure Theo Epstein's not leaving the MLB office unless he, gets a job where everything is lined up for him because his legacy is already set.
Right.
So it's my question is, at what point can we say that maybe Steve Cohen and the Mets have been a little bit too focused on the big name? Because last offseason, they set their bar really high. And when they couldn't get that president, they couldn't speak with some of the presidents they wanted to speak to. They ended up pivoting and just hiring a GM and deciding to maybe push this president hire to this offseason. Now you see Theo's off the table. I mean, I just saw Mike Mayer report that he's hearing that Billy Beane might be off the table as well, potentially, or that it's unlikely. So once the big names dry up, I mean, do the Mets need to just focus on finding someone like Michael Hill who has experience and can come in and just help run this thing and set the organization up the right way?
Yeah, for sure. I think though that you move from the highest, tier of candidates to the lowest, so they're probably just shuffling through. But I do agree in the sense that if you take a big picture view of this, and I don't mean this to sound snarky, but why would somebody like Theo Epstein or even Billy Bean? I know Bean hasn't won a World Series. Why would somebody like Epstein or Bean or even David Stearns, like, why would you come here? You've seen the instability, you've seen what happens, you've seen some of the meddling that's gone on. Now, granted, that was a lot of that in previous ownership, but in Steve Cohen's first year, you saw a lot of these same things in terms of crises and snafus um, that just that just would make it tougher on an experienced executive. And you wonder why would somebody risk their legacy to come here. And that's why I think eventually I'm not so sure they're going to get a name like Stearns or even Billy Bean. It's going to take a lot for those guys to uproot because it's a big job, and you see it's a it's not a cushy job in the sense of the workload, but like when you have it, there's some security in having it. So why would you uproot? It's going to take a lot for somebody to do that. So yeah, I do agree that eventually you have to move to someone like Michael Hill or others even that there are experienced executives out there you could get for this. Look, you could get somebody for this president of baseball operations gig and still hire a GM like they tried to do last year and have that GM mature into your new president of baseball operations. Maybe you can find somebody like a Sandy Alderson situation where, hey, they don't want to be there. They don't want to die with their boots on the ground sort of thing. And doesn't want to be there forever. But yeah, I always think you set the bar high because you never settle for mediocrity. And I believe in that. And the Mets should be pursuing the very best candidates out there. This is New York. The fans deserve that. It's a huge market. With Cohen's checkbook, they should have the resources to acquire one of those people. But like I said, I'm not going to be overly surprised if they do have to move to a Michael Hill, which isn't bad. Like that's not a bad name. It's just not your more famous executives or current or former. Um, but yeah, I do. It's going to take a lot because the way that this works is like the Mets don't yet have the credibility to attract one of those big. Like they don't have the credibility to offer somebody that security quite yet. It's going to be if somebody takes it, somebody with some security right now, it's going to be because they love the city, because they or from here, whatever it may be. But in terms of the big names, there's a lot of risk for those people risking their legacies and their security and their current positions to take one in an organization that has not experienced any sort of stability over the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's I was talking about the Luis Rojas being not fired, but not being retained as a manager, and I mean that's even a job that's more thankless than a GM. I don't know why anyone would want to be a manager nowadays, especially in New York. But that pressure cooker, I mean, you talk about Theo. Why would he want to, as you said, sign up for a job where in one instant Steve Cohen could fire out a tweet about your offense being terrible and undermine you? I mean, we saw it happen this year, and I'm at times Steve Cohen on Twitter is a lot of fun for fans. I overall don't have a problem with it, but the Mike Puma article that came out, that was a situation where I was like, that dies in a news cycle in 24 hours, and by tweeting about it, you keep it in the news cycle for multiple days. And
Sure.
so I think when you have, like you said, some of these guys who, David Stearns, for example, who has a great team that he's built in Milwaukee, has support of the ownership, has full reign there. It might not be as glamorous as New York, but yeah, it's a big risk to come to New York City. And you know what? If it worked out, I think these guys would certainly be happy with their decision because winning in New York is pretty awesome. But I mean, we haven't always seen that work out in New York, so it's a tough gamble to make on yourself.
Right. Yeah, you talk about New York being glamorous, and I do agree with that. And winning in New York, I think the 96 or the 96, 86, that's my birth, 86 documentary about the Mets really proves something we knew, when you talk about the 69 team. If you win in this city, if you win it all, I mean, you're remembered forever. I mean, from the 25th, well, it would be the 26th man nowadays, but the 25th man from those, I mean, people just remember you. You're always asked about that. like your legacy is forever cemented because you won in the biggest market. And there's a natural 24/7, 7 days a week relevancy to sports teams here. But I don't, if you're somebody like David Stearns, his team has won a heck of a lot more in the last half decade than the Mets. And so like, yeah, you figure that in is that it's going to take a lot for somebody like that to come, you would think. And I'm not even, this is just speculation. I'm just saying because the security of, like you said, having full reign and autonomy and like the support of ownership, you know what you've gotten yourselves into. And I think there's a certain part of it that people might not even like, but they might not willingly go into the pressure cooker that is New York. And that's like, I've seen a lot of fans say, well, if you're not willing to do that, then we don't want you. Da, da, da. Well, like, I don't blame some people for not wanting to do it because things get blown out of proportion here. It's a tougher job in some ways. The payoff is bigger, sure, because, if you win here, you're remembered forever. I mean, you're going to be a legend. But I do think it's going to be interesting because, like you said, those guys have security in some form or fashion. And there's not a lot of, not every team has a president of baseball operations. So it's like these are secure jobs, and to leave them to come to an unstable organization, I don't know. Now, granted, I'm not saying, it's all Steve Cohen's fault or all Sandy Alderson's fault, or that I've seen like reports that, nobody wants to work for Steve Cohen. I don't really buy that. Like, I don't, he's shown that he's passionate about the team and that he's going to back, the people he hires. But I just think that it's going to be way more of a risk for an experienced name, to leave their security than it would be for somebody just looking to get back into the front office game.
One reason to repair and maintain your cars is to save money. So why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, maybe even 100% more for the exact same auto parts at a chain store or new car dealership when you could just go to rockauto.com, a family business that has been serving auto parts to customers online for 20 years. They have everything you could want, from engine control modules to brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Whether it's for your classic or daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks and have it delivered directly to your door. The rockauto.com catalog is unique and remarkably easy to navigate. Quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle, then choose the brand, specifications, and prices you prefer. Go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, right locked on in there. How'd you hear about us box? So they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. I do want to switch over and talk a little bit about the manager situation, because I think that was still this week, right?
I mean, my days are running together on this beat, but I think so.
I think it was Monday. But yeah, so the situation with Rojas, I was making the argument on my podcast that if anyone, especially from a third party perspective, coming from my angle or a fan, if anyone tries to tell you that they know how to evaluate a manager today, I mean, you're fooling yourself. I think you have a little bit of a closer look because you did get the chance to see a little bit of the workings behind the scenes. What did you see from Rojas? Because to me, it just seems like a guy that was put in a really tough position. And I do understand the idea of hiring a president and then having that president fill out your staff. I think that is a fair argument for why Rojas lost his job. But to blame this season on him, to me, is it's overvaluing what he could have done to change the situation this season.
Yeah, he's a complete victim of circumstance. And anytime I see fans placing most of the blame on him, it's almost like they're telling on themselves and they don't know enough about the sport. And that's okay, because like the casual fan, even the diehard fan these days, it's hard to know that. How do I say this? In basketball, a coach draws up the plays, does the rotations, things like that. In baseball, it's shifted so much more to the front office having involvement in some form or fashion, and fans just don't know that unless they're told. So I totally understand that. I'm not saying that to chide fans in any way. I just think that there are a lot of situations and decisions, that are more scripted these days, and that were probably out of Luis Rojas's hands. The biggest example, like last year, look at, the World Series. I mean, you think Kevin Cash wanted to take out Blake Snell, like everybody's a human being. These are all baseball men. I mean, none of them are robots. Managers get the job because they're baseball men. And a lot of them have just had to blend to the analytics. And Luis Rojas has honestly done a great job of that. He's a traditional baseball mind because he grew up and his dad was a longtime manager. He grew up in clubhouses, literally went from the lowest levels of the Mets organization to manager and blended analytics along the way. So he knows the importance of it. But I do think there were certain situations where, don't you think a traditional baseball mind wants to let Taijuan Walker go in that situation instead of going to Aaron, even if Aaron Loops, the great call. But I do think some of it, maybe not even that decision, I don't think, was front office inspired. I'm just saying, oh, managers are, look, like you could get a guy who the best manager in baseball history and he'd be criticized in New York. That's just the way it goes. Like your in-game moves get criticized. But to place the blame on him is unfair because the way I see it in terms of covering the sport is that nowadays a manager's main skill set should be keeping a tight clubhouse, making sure players respect him, letting them know what it's almost like you're more of a conduit because you have to let players know where they stand based on what the front office thinks about them, based on what the front office sees, analytically, based on, okay, why are you doing, here's why we're doing this because the analytics teams, that's probably not easy because the manager's literally in the crossfire, between all levels of an organization. And so I do think, does Luis Rojas shoulder some of the blame for that? Yeah, absolutely. And he even said that himself, that as the manager, I mean, he really wore it after Sunday's game and said that as a manager, he feels responsible for the team not winning more games, not reaching its goal. But to blame the season completely on him is ludicrous. And I think Ron Darling had a great point about, look at up and down the lineup. I mean, you and I could probably think now and single out what 3 hitters who performed the way they should. 4 if you count JD Davis, who had limited at bats. Because of injuries. I mean, the underperformances on this the lineup. I mean, the manager isn't directly involved in all of the day-to-day hitting nuances. So things like that, it's almost like you're getting mad at a guy for something he has no control over. And so I do think that the Mets, while they have reason to let him go, not pick up his option because like it makes the president of baseball operations job more attractive, and that you have the right to, to pick the opportunity to pick your own manager. The Mets could really regret this one because I think Luis Rojas's best strengths, the way he connects with players, um, is the ideal strength of a manager these days. And I mean, the in-game stuff takes time, but I think the way I, talk to people who were, talk to someone who's in his corner and did support him, from the previous regime, that really just raved about the way Rojas called games and thought he did a phenomenal job, and thought that, I think for me personally, the greatest sign of his managerial ability was when he had all those replacements and was constantly having to plug moving parts in and still putting guys in a position to succeed. Um, and so I really think this season spiraled on them. But I don't think it was a case of, like, I still think the Mets actually did show some fight. I just don't think they were as good as any of us thought they were going to be. I don't think they quit on Rojas or anything like that. So what I saw was a manager put in a very difficult circumstance where his first major league managing opportunity was a 60-game season in 2020 with a bunch of protocols and a flawed roster. Like we saw that roster last year severely lacked depth, in the most important parts, especially starting pitching. And then this year, I mean, yeah, season spiraled on them. They had to play 13 straight against the Dodgers and the Giants, who, if we did the postseason based on seeding and not leagues, might end up in the World Series, against one of probably the 2 best teams in baseball, if we didn't do the American National League. But what I saw was a manager put in a very difficult situation. He was probably more of a victim of circumstance than anything. And that's why I say that regardless of what Twitter will tell you about his in-game moves or this or that, um, there are a lot of things that I saw in terms of the way he connected with players and the way they respected him, and how he was able to tell a Robinson Cano last year that he was going to change his role because he had to he had to get somebody better with a better glove in there, and yada yada, but also connect with younger players. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm fairly certain Luis Rojas has a very bright future in the game, which sounds weird to say because he's been in the game for so long. He was in the organization for 16 years. But the Mets could really end up regretting this one.
All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back for another football season. And as always, BetOnline is your #1 spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With a new updated site and interface, There's now even more odds, props, and contests available at betonline.ag, which continues to be your number one source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 100% welcome bonus on your first deposit with the promo code NFL100. That's double your initial deposit. From football, basketball, baseball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Yeah, and one of the comparisons I've used recently is I've talked about Gabe Kapler, and Gabe Kapler, 2 years in Philly, is seen as, hey, look, the analytics manager fell on his face and he wasn't good. Then he goes to the Giants, where he gets into a really good analytics organization with Faranzati, and everything is set up for him. And this year, he's probably the manager of the year, most wins in baseball. I would not be surprised at all if the same thing happened with Rojas in a couple of years. I don't think that he has shortcomings as a manager. I think it's just a really tough job. And one of the things that makes it so difficult, like you said, we don't know all the inner workings. And so you talk about Kevin Cash pulling Blake Snell. Obviously that move didn't work, but let's just say he leaves Blake Snell in and Snell blows the game. Well, now you got a problem with your bosses because you didn't listen to their analytics telling you that Snell should be pulled in that spot. So you basically have to toe that line of doing what the analytics tell you, which for the Mets and part of their season where they were winning in the margins with all these replacements and great pitching, I bet the analytics helped them a lot. It certainly helped with the team defense, putting everyone in the right position. It helps more than it hurts. But at the end of the day, there's no one from that analytics department that's sitting in front of Justin Toscano at the end of the game and all the other beat writers answering questions. And that's where he ends up being the fall guy to fans, because he's the face in front of them at the end of these games.
Right. And that almost seems like the way you said it is the way I think about it. And it almost seems like oversimplified, which is like what baffles me is that people just don't get it. Like it's like there's so many things that go into preparing for a game or scripting a game, whatever it may be. But there's only one person who sits on Zoom at the end of the day or at the table in front of reporters, and then by virtue in front of fans. It's almost like, you want to kind of shake fans a little bit and go like, hey, like you only hate this guy because he's the face of it. Like he's out there explaining everybody else's decisions. Like, and that's what it comes down to these days is that he doesn't have, managers don't have full autonomy. It's become more collaborative than it ever has been. And yeah, and you're right. Like I think analytics, I mean, I remember I'm trying to think, that series in Atlanta back in May when everybody was hurt, Taijuan Walker goes down. Now you have, Khalil Lee in right field. The guy's never been up at the majors. You have, Blankenhorn, I think at second base. Yeah, exactly. And so I think, yeah, Cameron Maybin. And I just remember late in the game there, like there was one ball that was smoked to the gap, but because Khalil Lee was playing, shaded more toward the, like things like that. I mean, the Mets were positioned pretty perfectly. I mean, I think that was a big adjustment this year that led to overall like better team defense. So things like that, analytics, like you said, definitely, I think they help more than they hurt if done correctly. It's just that people don't focus on, people focus on the human element of the game, which I think is present. But if you were to look at some of these pitchers the third time through the order, I mean, it's not analytics that's telling them to pull them. I mean, you can look at the splits like the third time, through the order, and it's like, if you or I were managing, we'd probably be a little wary of leaving them out there too, especially, for the top of the lineup. But I do think it's almost too simple to think like this, but it's like Luis Rojas was the fall guy because he was the guy in front of the camera, because he was the guy having to explain these decisions, everybody else's decisions. Look, the guy had one GM last year, and then had two this year, and then his GM basically dipped out when he got the driving while intoxicated charges. And like, so you've got not only that, but an ownership change, organizational upheaval. Now you're reporting to Sandy instead of Brody and, others. And it's like now, and then you're reporting to Jared Port. Oh, and now it's Zach. And so it's like, I mean, you tell me like who can succeed in an environment like that, and I think a lot of what we saw from, the clubhouse, and I know the clubhouse people make jokes about, oh, a flag flying forever for team chemistry kind of thing, but it's like the fact that Rojas fostered an environment like that amidst all of this, I think is something to commend. And like you said, I mean, I'm not going to be surprised if he succeeds, because I do think, like, if I were him, they did offer him the opportunity to remain in the organization. I'm not going to say, who's to say what occurs, but if I'm other teams, I'm immediately reaching out to Luis Rojas and offering him third base coach, or even like some thing on their coaching staff for a team with like an older coach, like the Braves. Like Snicker's not, has said he's not going to be able to manage forever, or like somebody like Tony La Russa, who probably, because I do think that Luis Rojas is a star manager in the making, and I think that the Mets, well, they probably had to make a decision like this because of the circumstances and who they're hiring. Yeah, I could see it in a couple years. I mean, I could really, really. I don't think this is going to be his last job. I think people in the baseball world look more highly on Luis Rojas than people on Twitter, and one of those evaluations matters, and the other doesn't really matter. And I really do think that we're going to see. I mean, he's gonna, if he wants to pursue that again, he will be in a big league dugout again, managing a team someday.
I feel bad that this brought such joy to me, but the idea of Rojas going to the Braves, for all the fans that hated on him, to see him go to the Braves and beat the Mets a little bit, not that I would enjoy it in the moment, but it's certainly some irony that I could appreciate. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it's like there are some fans, like yourself, who are rational, and I just think like, but there are others. It's like how in God's green earth do you think you can coach like a high school baseball team, or like just like watch baseball for 30 years and think more than somebody who has literally like worked in the game for his whole adult life, and that was after playing it, and he's been in the game for his whole life around his father. Like like the fact that people say Luis Rojas doesn't know baseball, like to me that's like unreal. Like as somebody who's spoken to the guy like outside of the Zooms, and like things he's taught me that I never would have known about before, or never would have noticed, or things he cued me in on that he does strategically, like. And I get to see it from a little bit of a closer perspective, but that's why I always try to be a little easier on a guy like, because it's like I don't understand how some of the Twitter audience, I'm not going to say all the Twitter audience, because I do think it's probably, more rational than irrational. The irrational voices are just a lot louder. But it's crazy to me, because I just think, if you stuck him, managing the Braves or somebody else eventually, like I do think he's built for it. I don't even think it wasn't a case of, oh, he wasn't made for New York. Look at how he handled every one of the situations, like the rat raccoon thing, the thumbs down. Like he never added a distraction to his team. Not cut out for New York as being like a Mickey Callaway who actively added distractions to his team. Luis Rojas, amid distractions, never added to them, never compounded on them. A lot of times just tried to, put water on the fire. So I do think, I mean, in terms of that, I mean, he was definitely cut out for New York, and he understood what it took. When somebody asked him about the fire Rojas chance, he said fans, have the right to say what they want. He never, got upset. When I remember the Evan Roberts and, Robertson Carton clip from a few weeks back about his decisions in Miami, and like he was just getting grilled, and to not even like yell back or anything. I mean, I do think he's got the makings of a very good manager, and it's going to be, I almost feel too certain about that. So I guess we can come back to this podcast in the future if I'm like just totally wrong. But I do think that it's crazy, because I think Mets fans don't look at him as highly as he should be viewed, because I really do think he's more of a victim of circumstance than anything. I don't think there's really one key thing you can point at that is like, oh wow, like Rojas was just awful at this, or will never make it because of this. I mean, he's still learning at the end of the day. And the part that is so intricate and crucial in baseball these days is the connecting with the players, because they have so many voices, from the front office, the player development people, the performance staff. One thing I've learned is there's a lot of distrust between players and a lot of the outside, the forces, even on the team. And it shouldn't be that way, because they're all working for the same goal. But somebody like Luis Rojas, who can blend with everybody and has great relationships throughout the entire organization and can connect with players, that's pretty rare. Like it's going to be, the Mets. I mean, they put some pressure on themselves. They're going to have to hire somebody that is clearly better.
I think that I just pulled up Carlos Carrasco's stats this year, and I think the simplest way to put it is it was basically his first year managing a full season. You were expecting to get 30 starts from Jacob deGrom, 30 starts from Carlos Carrasco, and probably 15 from Noah Syndergaard. And altogether, you got 27 starts from all of them. Actually, 29, I guess, if you include Noah Syndergaard's 2 1-inning stints. It was a lot of injuries. He still had a 77-win team. I'm not saying it was great, but he's certainly been made out to be to have managed a way worse team than the Mets ended up being. And I also think that because we only see the 3-4 hours of a game night, we don't see everything that leads up to each game. And I talked to you a lot about this in the last time you were on the show, just all the different things that go into prepping for a game, the travel. I mean, I'm sitting here just recording podcasts every day, and I was exhausted in September. I'm sure you probably felt the same way traveling around. So,
God,
I mean,
yeah.
I can't imagine what it's really like to be in the trenches. And I think Rojas still should be commended for the job he did this year. And it's just, like you said, a victim of circumstance.
Yeah. I thought toward the end of 2019, Mickey Callaway really lost his cool. I didn't see that with Rojas this year. You saw him get a little more downtrodden when things just like weren't looking great, but you never saw him lose his cool to the point where it was going to become more of a distraction for his team. And I never think he took the attention away from his team. I think he always put it on his team. And I think that he's truly somebody you can look at. God, and I'm wary of saying this about anybody in the Mets organization anymore, but he's truly somebody you can look at as he's just a genuinely good guy. Like in terms, he's a good baseball man, but he's just genuinely a good person. I think, his players love him because of that. I remember hearing one talk about just how like they liked Mickey, but it was just different with Rojas because you had somebody you felt like cared about you, like, kind of like a brother, like he just he really cared about you. He was really on your side, wanted you to do well, was willing to put you in the right positions to do so. And I just think, yeah, I do think in terms of the pitching staff, the bullpen was good. The starting pitching wasn't the issue, but the injuries really, did it in, like you just detailed. And I do think that it's not like this guy had a championship rotation. It's not like he won 77 games with the Los Angeles Dodgers. I mean, I just think it's almost ridiculous because, especially some of the hitting things, you saw how the lack of an organizational philosophy hurt this team. Like they were always in between. You saw how the philosophy was not set yet. And there's a learning curve. Like that's no one's fault. If you fire your hitting coaches a month in, like it's going to happen. And so, and they had the reasons for that, obviously. But I do think it's like you look at the hitting. So many guys look to be making adjustments, and then we're reverting back. Like, is that Luis Rojas' problem? You can't like wire human brain. It's so much of it. I feel like was out of his control. But as he said, I think in his statement Monday in that press release, it's just a results-oriented business. And I think, he was a victim of circumstance when you look at perhaps the toughest 2-year stretch in franchise history for like a manager. I can't think of one that's like, I'm trying to think of other ownership GM. I mean, I can't think of one that would be this traumatic or this, just a constantly changing situation for a manager. I mean, he really got the short end of the stick. And you could argue that he had this opportunity in the first place because of some of that turmoil, because of the Beltran thing. He was never the guy anyways. But I don't think he was never the guy because they didn't like him or respect him. I just think he had some maturing to, he had some more learning to do and growing to do, and they liked Beltran. But like I said, if I'm another team, like another big league team, like, I'm reaching out to Luis Rojas because he's some guy that you want on your staff. And I do think that his track record of building relationships and all the people who are going to be able to talk about him and be references for him, vouch for him from the minor leagues up to the big leagues. I mean, he was really well respected.
Yeah, I think he's, like you said, he's got a bright future. And I don't think this is the last we're hearing of Luis Rojas. Thank you so much for coming on today and shedding some light, some behind the scenes look at that situation, everything going with the Mets. Why don't you let everyone know where they can find your work?
Yeah. Subscribe to NorthJersey.com. Or I'm on Twitter at Justin C. Well, it's right there. There you go.
You got
Twitter
an
there.
audio audience too. So Justin C.
Yeah.
Toscano on Twitter.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's pretty cool though. I like this little graphic. I mean, you really did it up here.
Yeah. Yep. The power of YouTube now. So just getting started over there. So the audio audience still needs to hear those things. But anyway, thank you as always for coming on, and looking forward to talking to you again throughout the off season.
Yeah. Of course. Thanks so much for having me.